Our approve and finalize functionality is working out pretty well, but the status of each of these requests is still really unclear to our users. In this video, we're going to add some additional CSS styling to give our users a little bit more of a hint of what requests are ready to go. Now notice that I've added two additional requests here. The first request, or the request with ID of 1, I should say, has enough approvals, but it has not yet been finalized. The request with ID of 2 does not have enough approvals, so it's not ready to finalize, and it hasn't been finalized for that matter. So I'm going to say that if a request has been finalized, I want to hide its buttons. We had just finalized the first row, or this ID of 0 right here, so I think that these two buttons right here should probably be hidden from our users. And we'll also say that if a request is ready to be finalized, then we should mark the entire row with like green or like highlight it or something like that. I think those two changes, both hiding buttons and marking a row with some highlight, will make the status of our requests a lot more obvious. So let's flip over to our code editor and start adding those two additional improvements. All right, so I think the first thing we'll do is make sure that we appropriately mark a request as complete or finalized by hiding the buttons. So I'm going to go down to my two buttons down here, and we're going to add some additional logic around these. So what we're going to do is going to be a little bit of, just a little bit of typing, but just bear with me for a second. So right above the first button here, I'm going to add one opening curly brace. And then under the button, I'm going to add one additional closing curly brace as well. Then inside the top curly brace, we're going to add a ternary expression. So we're going to look at request.complete. Remember that the .complete property right here is a Boolean that is specified on our request struct that tells us whether or not a given request has already been finalized. So if complete is true, then we want to hide this button. So to do so, I'm going to add on request.complete, a space, a question mark, another space, null, and then a colon. And after the colon, we're going to add a set of parentheses that wrap our button component, like so. All right, so a little bit of reformatting here, and there it is. All right, so let's look at this little segment here in total. So we're saying that if request.complete is true, then return the value null from this entire expression. When we return null, we will not show this button anymore. However, if request.complete is false, then we will instead render the entire button right here. So let's save this file and see what this does for the first request in my list. So now back over here, that approve button is hidden because this thing has already been completed. Now we can repeat that same process for the other button as well. So I'm going to place a set of curly braces like so. I'm going to indent my button. I'll reference request.complete, question mark null, and then wrap that button tag in a set of parentheses. And I'll save this as well. Okay, so now the finalize button is hidden here too. So now it's a lot more obvious that, hey, you can't interact with this thing anymore. It's already been finalized. Now I think that another kind of little improvement to this row right here that would be really nice is if we just kind of like grayed out the entire row. That would make it really, really obvious that this request has already been finalized. So for that, we're going to make use of a little prop that we can pass to our row component right here. So this is a property that is tied to semantic UI. So I'm going to add on disabled. And if we want this thing to be disabled, we're going to pass in request.complete as well. So whenever this thing is complete, disabled will be true. So let's save this and see what that does. Okay, now that's looking pretty good right there. Now it is abundantly obvious that this request right here is entirely complete, no more interacting with it. Now I think maybe the last thing we need to do is somehow indicate that my request with ID 1 right here is ready to be finalized. So back inside my render component, I'm going to add an additional flag up the top here. And this flag is going to indicate whether or not our row is, or our request is ready to be finalized. So I'm going to make a new variable called ready to finalize. And this thing is going to look at our total number of approvers tied to our, or the total number of approvals tied to our request. So that will be request.approval count. And we're going to check to see if this thing is greater than approvers count divided by 2, like so. So we're going to have this ready to finalize flag. I'm going to then add one additional prop to my row component. I'm going to say positive equals ready to finalize, like so. So this is another prop that is tied to my row component, another prop tied to semantic UI. If we pass in true for positive right here, it'll kind of like highlight our row. So let's save this thing and see what this does. So now when we go back over, very good. So now you'll notice that this row right here is marked as green, meaning this thing is ready to be approved. However, now the row that we've already kind of finalized right here is green as well. And we probably don't want that to be green. So we should probably add in some little expression to positive right here. So I'm going to say if this thing is ready to finalize and it has not yet been request.complete. So if it's ready to finalize and it's not been marked as complete, then we want this thing to be marked as green. So I'm going to save this as well. Now if we go back over, there we go. Okay, so just very small improvements here, or very small changes, but it has dramatically increased the ability for our users to take a glance at this table and understand the status of each of these requests. So this is looking pretty good. All right, I think there's just one last little small thing that I want to do. You'll recall that if we look back at our mockup, we had wanted to put down at the bottom left, found one request here. So let's take care of this last little piece in the next video, and I think we'll be all set with our request index component.